You already know exactly what it meant when there was no label on that tape. Today, we're going back. Accurately. No Great Depression, no footage from the 1950s, no padding. Just the 80s. The failure of most nostalgia content about this decade is structural, and the structure is specific enough to name. YouTube's monetization architecture pays significantly more for long videos. TV-length content in the 40 to 60-minute range represents 26% of uploads, but pulls in 46% of revenue. A video that crosses 8 minutes unlocks multiple mid-roll ad placements. The incentive to pad isn't incidental, it's baked into the platform's economic design, and creators who respond to that incentive rationally end up filling runtime with whatever footage is available. Stock footage libraries catalog historical Americana by era without much discrimination. A generic search for vintage American life might return footage from 1932, sitting 3 files away from footage from 1982. Both are sepia-toned. Both feature people in work clothes. Nobody validates the dates against what the title promised. The result? Great Depression breadlines spliced between He-Man commercials. 1950s suburbia inserted between clips of kids feeding quarters into Pac-Man machines. Grainy black and white film of people who were old before most viewers' parents were born. Cut into a decade that deserves better than to be padded with other people's history. The people who were actually children in the 1980s catch this within seconds. Their expertise in this particular subject is exact and hard-won, and it doesn't tolerate substitution. This video's contract is different. Every artifact named here can be dated. Every name attached to a card, a campaign, a cassette, or a cable channel is checkable. Specificity is the only form of respect this audience is owed, and the only way to earn it to stay precisely in the decade the title claims. Start with the tape. A T120 VHS cassette weighed roughly 1/4 pound. Not a lot, but enough to feel substantial. A dense plastic rectangle, approximately 19 centimeters by 10, with a transparent window on the front face that let you see the 2 reels inside and gauge how much tape had been run. The window was practical, not decorative. You could look at it and know whether you were near the beginning, the middle, or the end without playing it. Lifting a T120 was different from lifting a DVD case or a paperback. It had a mechanical solidity. It felt like it contained something. The 120 in T120 indicated minutes available at standard play, though in practice the tape held slightly more than advertised. Run the VCR in EP mode, extended play, and that same cassette held 6 hours. 6 hours was a week's worth of evening programming on a single cassette, which is exactly how households use them. 3 movies in EP mode. Picture quality somewhat degraded compared to standard play, the trade-off generally considered acceptable. Every household with a VCR had a stack of T120s beside the machine, and every single one of them was supposed to have something written on it. Every blank tape sold in the 1980s came with a sticker sheet inside the box. Not one label, a full sheet. A main label for the face of the cassette. A spine label sized to fit the narrow edge. A tape length indicator. Supplementary alphabet and number stickers for those who wanted the cataloging system across multiple tapes. The manufacturers understood what behavior they were enabling. People recording off television and cable, building personal libraries that required organization to be usable. The sticker sheet was the infrastructure of the whole system. Without it, every recording was an unlabeled tape waiting to happen. Maxell, TDK, Memorex, those were the names on the shelves, and each carried its own weight. Maxell built iconic status through an advertising campaign that originated as a 2-page spread in Rolling Stone magazine in 1980 and transitioned to television commercials in 1981. The image: a man in a low chair, positioned directly in front of a speaker cabinet, blown horizontal by the force of the sound coming out of it. Cocktail glass and sunglasses suspended mid-tilt, hair streaming back, the body at an angle that no person could actually hold, but that communicated the idea perfectly. This tape could withstand whatever you put it through. The campaign ran in various executions across the early part of the decade, the print version appearing in 1982, TV spots running from 1981 into 1983, depending on the specific format. If you bought blank tapes in those years, you encountered that image. 40 years later, mention Maxell to someone who was there, and they'll reconstruct the man in the chair from memory before you finish the sentence. TDK marketed itself alongside Maxell as the other premium option. The two names appeared together on store shelves in the way competing premium brands do when each is genuinely good, and the argument between them is largely aesthetic. Memorex ran, "Is it live or is it Memorex?" Ella Fitzgerald's voice shattering crystal on television, the claim being that a recording on Memorex tape was indistinguishable from the original performance. You knew all three brand names before you could reliably spell them, which is exactly what successful brand penetration into a childhood looks like. A single blank T120 tape cost around $20 in the early years of the format, unadjusted for inflation, which matters because the early decade pricing trained the generation of people who adopted VHS on a specific relationship to blank media. By 1985, prices had dropped substantially. Period pricing from that era puts blank tapes at $2 to $5, depending on brand and retail channel. Grocery stores competed on price. But the early decade economics established the pattern. Tapes were worth something, they got reused across multiple recording sessions, and what was on them needed to be tracked. For comparison, a rental VHS tape, the cassette that a video store paid to put on its shelf, cost the store somewhere between $80 and $100 in the early 1980s. Not what the customer paid to borrow it, what the store paid to own one copy. That single economic fact explains everything else. The color-coded labeling systems, the rewind fees, the replacement cost charges for damaged or lost tapes. All of it. A store with 1,000 titles had somewhere between $80,000 and $100,000 on its shelves at early decade pricing, and every policy that store enforced was protecting that investment. The video rental stores that defined the early 1980s were overwhelmingly independent. Mom-and-pop operations, usually a storefront with shelving on 3 walls, run by people who had bought their inventory at $80 to $100 per cassette, and needed to turn each title over repeatedly to recoup the cost. Blockbuster Video wasn't founded until 1985 and spent most of the late 1980s and early 1990s becoming the national presence it eventually was. When someone places a video store memory in 1982 or 1983, they mean an independent operation, a specific store with a specific owner, a specific smell of plastic and carpet, and a cataloging system that grew organically from the first week of business. Those independent stores developed color-coded spine label systems without anyone mandating them. Horror got red or orange spines, comedy got yellow or blue. The palette wasn't codified in any trade association document or format specification. It emerged from the practical problem of thousands of different store owners trying to help customers navigate walls of identical black cassette cases. Walk into a store you'd never visited before, and you could read the genre organization within 30 seconds, because whoever had stocked the shelves had solved the same problem the same way everyone else had solved it. On nearly every rental tape, affixed to the cassette body itself, was a sticker that became the decade's most persistent, polite request. Be kind, please rewind. Sometimes accompanied by a smiley face, sometimes presented in block capitals with a border. Always a request rather than a command, because the VCR didn't automatically rewind at the end of a movie. You watched the final frame, pressed stop, ejected the tape, and the magnetic ribbon inside was positioned at the very end of the content. The next person who rented that title sat through the full mechanical rewind before they could start watching, which, on a T120 in EP mode, could take several minutes. Some stores bought standalone rewinder machines and positioned them at the front counter. These were devices shaped like small sports cars or simple cassette-shaped boxes with a motor inside and a single button on the face, designed to rewind a tape faster than the VCR mechanism could manage, and without putting wear on the VCR head. If a store had one of those machines visible at checkout, the message about rewinding was already delivered before you handed over your membership card. Others charged a fee. In August 1985, the specific date is August 30th, 1985, the Chicago Tribune documented the friction in terms that read as contemporaneous reporting rather than retrospect. A customer described a video store's enforcement. Forget to rewind a tape, and the store would charge $1. Community memory puts the charge anywhere from 50 cents to $3, depending on the store and the year. The Blockbuster-specific rewind fee, its dollar amount, and when it was formalized, that's less cleanly documented in the historical record. The 1985 Chicago Tribune account is the sharpest primary source for a specific fee at a specific moment. What settled across the industry is that the culture of the fee was real, that it generated genuine friction between stores and customers, and that "Be kind, please rewind" functioned as an actual financial warning, not a decorative slogan. Late fees were a separate structure and ultimately far larger in scale. Blockbuster's late fee revenue, by the year 2000, reached approximately $800 million annually, 16% of total company revenue. The pre-2001 per-day structure was precise. If a movie rented for $2.99, each additional day cost another $2.99 per day. A single forgotten rental held 3 days too long cost you the equivalent of buying a cheaper tape outright. That math compounded, and it trained everyone who rented regularly to track their due dates with the same attention they gave anything else that cost them money if they forgot it. But none of that is the unlabeled tape. The unlabeled tape occupied a different category entirely, and understanding it requires holding the full economics of the format in mind simultaneously. Blank tapes cost real money early in the decade and became cheaper as the format matured, which meant people reused them across multiple recording sessions throughout the decade. You'd record something on a T120, watch it once or twice, then record something over it when the space was needed. A single cassette that had been in the household for 3 years might have 4 or 5 different recording sessions layered across its length, the most recent content occupying the front of the tape, earlier recordings surviving past the point where the new content ended. The tape held whatever was put on it most recently from the beginning, and whatever survived unrewound at the back end, and there was no way to know the composition without playing it through. A labeled tape told you what to expect. Even a label that no longer accurately described the tape's current contents, someone had recorded over an old movie but left the original label attached, was at least a data point about the cassette's history. You knew someone had organized it according to some intent at some point. An unlabeled tape offered nothing. You couldn't find out what was inside without playing it, and once you played it, whatever was on it was in your memory. The anxiety around this object was never articulated as a formal household rule. Nobody posted a list of VCR policies, but the understanding was real and enforced socially the way the most durable household norms are always enforced. By implication, by the behavior of other people in the house when they encountered an unlabeled tape. By the specific way someone said, "That one doesn't have a label," and then set it aside without playing it. You absorbed the shape of the rule from watching the rule in operation, over and over, until you understood it as completely as any stated policy. Here is the specific geography of the decision. The cassette in your hand, unlabeled, T120 body, both reels visible through the front window. The remote in the other hand. The VCR accepting the tape when you pushed it in. That specific mechanical sound, the door engaging, the mechanism initializing, the brief pause before the display showed the tape was ready. You are alone, or close enough to alone, that the decision is yours without appeal. You've already played the labeled tapes in the pile. You know what those are. The unlabeled one has been there since you can remember, which could mean it was there before you were aware of what was in the stack at all. The range of what could be on it was genuinely wide. Birthday parties, grandparents around a table, someone blowing out candles, the date stamp in the corner showing a year from when you were much younger, completely harmless. This happened often enough that it was a real possibility, and a genuine relief when it turned out to be the answer. Home movies from before you were born. This was stranger than it sounds. Footage of your parents as young people, moving through rooms and speaking in a way you'd never witnessed because you only knew them as your parents, not as people who had existed before you did. They were talking to someone off camera with the ease of people who weren't being observed for posterity, which meant they were different on tape than they were in person, and the difference was disorienting in a way that didn't have a clean name. Movies someone had recorded off cable and forgotten to label, which meant you'd be several minutes in before you recognized what you were watching, and sometimes that recognition came after you'd seen something that had no business being in your afternoon. Something your older sibling had recorded and deliberately left unlabeled because a label would have created a record they didn't want to exist. This category covered a lot of territory. You generally understood which direction you were in within the first 30 seconds of playback. Something your parents had recorded for themselves during hours when the house was otherwise empty, which had been left unlabeled for reasons that were obvious in retrospect, and that you understood as a child without being able to articulate the understanding precisely. The absence of a label as a form of household privacy, as low-tech security, as a reasonable expectation that nobody would play what they couldn't identify. VHS communities have spent years collecting these accounts. A Reddit post in r/Gen X captures the persisting uncertainty exactly. Found a couple VHS tapes that I saved to digitize at some point. One of them is unlabeled. What could it be? Graduation party? The graduation party represents the optimistic end of the range, benign, almost welcome, a time capsule rather than a problem. Another thread in r/VHS documents a specific unlabeled tape's contents. Terrifying religious programming led by some cult guy in far upstate North Y. Extremely graphic and private surgery footage. On the same tape. Whatever had been there before had been partially recorded over, and the person who found it decades later had no frame of reference for any of it and posted to a community forum to try to make sense of what they'd seen. The psychological weight of the unlabeled tape was specific and accumulated. The decision you made when you held one was irreversible in one direction. You could always choose not to press play, but once you'd pressed it, whatever was on there existed in your head permanently. You were making that call alone, in real time, with no preview and no undo. You would end up in therapy over some of those decisions. Or you'd carry the image for the rest of your life without quite being able to explain why it stayed with you. Or you'd find something completely mundane and spend 20 minutes watching someone else's graduation party and feel the particular deflation of having built up an anxiety around nothing. The labeling conventions of the decade existed precisely because of this. You labeled because the alternative was the unlabeled tape in the pile, and eventually someone would play it, and the whole room would go quiet in a specific and recognizable way. The comment sections on videos about this subject fill up in a way that other content doesn't. Not with reactions, but with stories. People who return to tell their version, who match their account against someone else's, who need to confirm that the anxiety they remember was shared. 18 separate replies on a single comment about unlabeled tapes from people who had something specific to add. That's not passive recognition. It's a community confirming a shared experience from the inside. In the winter of 1983, things got violent over a doll. Cabbage Patch Kids had been building toward mainstream peak for most of that year, and by November, the peak had arrived in a form that retail wasn't built to handle. The retail price was $21 per doll. By late November, that price was academic because stores didn't have them. The toy chest in New York ran out weeks before Christmas and started taking names and deposits. Roughly 800 people got on the waiting list. A Zayre department store in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, had a store manager grab a baseball bat to protect himself from the crowd that formed when a shipment arrived. A Virginia department store had 5,000 shoppers converge on it for 120 dolls in stock. Time magazine covered the craze. Academic research documented 5 all-out riots at retail locations across the country during the holiday season. The doll was manufactured under license by Coleco Industries for Xavier Roberts' Appalachian Artworks. Soft-bodied, uniquely styled, each one sold with an adoption certificate rather than a sales receipt. The premise was that you weren't buying a toy, you were adopting a child. Every Cabbage Patch Kid came with a name. You didn't pick the name came with the doll. This was either charming or unsettling depending on your relationship to the marketing concept, and Topps Chewing Gum had a very clear view of which side they were on. Topps filed the trademark registration for Garbage Pail Kids in November 1984, months before the first card reached a store. The test release happened in May 1985 in the New York area. The nationwide rollout came in June 1985. 25 cents per pack. 5 stickers plus a slab of gum. Artist John Pound painted the card fronts. Writer Mark Newgarden worked the copy. Artist Tom Bunk painted the card backs. The concept was described at the time as a spit in the eye to the syrupy cuteness of the dolls it targeted. Where Cabbage Patch Kids were soft and adopted and precious, Garbage Pail Kids were grotesque, violent, anatomically specific, and funny in the way that discovery of adult discomfort tends to be funny to an 8-year-old who has just figured out that they have access to something adults want them not to have. Series 1 ran cards numbered 1A through 41B. Every card existed in two variants, an A version and a B version with the same painted image and different names. Card 1A was Nasty Nick, Card 1B was Evil Eddie. Card 2A was Junk Food John, Card 2B was Ray Decay. Card 3A was Upchuck, Card 3B was Heavin' Steven. Card 4A was Fryin' Brian, Card 4B was Electric Bill. Card 5A was Dead Ted, Card 5B was J Decay. Card 23A was Drippy Dan, Card 23B was Leaky Lou. Card 30A was New Wave Dave, Card 30B was Graffiti Petey. Card 8A was Atom Bomb. Atom Bomb depicted a child in a yellow jumpsuit whose torso had become a nuclear detonation, the mushroom cloud expanding outward from where the head joined the shoulders, the blast filling the card's frame, the kid's face suspended somewhere inside the explosion, with an expression that suggested this was going exactly as intended. Card 8B, same image, same blast, was Blasted Billy. Production documentation makes the original concept available. President Reagan's finger on the red button that triggered the explosion. Topps removed Reagan before print. The mushroom cloud stayed. Atom Bomb became the most collectible card from the original run, and anyone who had pulled one from a pack in 1985 and kept it in decent condition understood immediately that what they were holding was different from the other cards in the stack, even without being able to articulate why. The pack opening ritual was its own specific experience. 25 cents at a drugstore or corner shop or any of the dozens of retail points that carried them. The wrapper was waxy, with the GPK logo and the price printed on it, and it had a particular resistance when you started to peel it open. Not the slick, instant open of modern packaging, but a slight drag that meant you were doing something, tearing something, entering into something. Inside, 5 cards face down, plus the gum already assuming the shape of the cards from sitting against them in the pack. You could identify the card's condition before you turned them over by whether the corners had taken any damage from the wrapper. Near mint required perfect corners. Any deformation at all was a downgrade. The A/B system was built for exactly the kind of obsessive collecting behavior that elementary school kids could sustain for years. To have a complete set meant having both variants of every card in the series. To have both variants meant buying packs until the gaps closed, trading for the ones you couldn't pull, negotiating across lunch tables over the difference between an 8A in good condition and an 8A in near mint. At 25 cents per 5-card attempt, the economics were accessible enough that anyone with $1 had the right to participate, but rare enough that completion remained genuinely difficult. You always needed something. The hierarchy in trading was understood without being taught. Series 1 cards in good condition run approximately $10 each in today's collector market. The scarcity of early printings, the condition degradation from 4 decades of handling, the concentration of collector interest in the original release. Series 2 is next in value. Series 15 has its own elevated floor. Series 10 through 14 run roughly 25 to 50 cents per card. One rare card in gem mint graded condition has reportedly reached $12,000. In 1985, the entire conversation was happening in the 25 cents per 5 cards economy, and the value hierarchy was expressed not in dollars, but in condition grades and series numbers and the specific social currency of having what other kids wanted. The complete original run, OS1 and OS2 in 1985, OS3, OS4, OS5, and OS6 in 1986, OS7 through OS11 across 1987, OS12 through OS15 in 1988, OS16 completing the original sequence. 16 series, card numbers 1A through 661B at the end of the run, covering roughly 4 years of active production. Series 8, released in April 1987, covering card numbers 293A through 334B, contains a detail that lives entirely in collector documentation. It was the only series in the original run to use a capital A and B for the card number designations rather than lowercase. Every other series, 8A, 8B. Series 8, 8A, 8B. That distinction isn't in any general reference. It's the kind of thing you know because you held the cards. Schools began responding in 1986, when television news coverage of the controversy started reaching parents who hadn't noticed their children's collections. Richard Henry Dana Elementary School in Dana Point, California, banned them. Washington Elementary School in Santa Ana, California, banned them. At least one Connecticut school district extended the restriction to all school property. The stated reasoning, documented in multiple accounts, the cards were too ugly and nasty. These were individual decisions by school principals, not formal district-wide policies, but the practical effect was the same wherever they landed. The cards became contraband in a specific, limited sense, kept out of the school bag on school days, stored somewhere a parent wouldn't find them, not produced at lunch if a teacher was within range. This put Garbage Pail Kids into a specific category of 1986 cultural artifact that required operational concealment from adults if you were going to enjoy it fully. Hard rock music was in that category. Video games were adjacent. The kids who hid their collections, who worried their parents would confiscate them, who traded at the back of the classroom in the window before the teacher arrived. They were participating in something that felt transgressive precisely because adults had said it shouldn't exist. The prohibition was half the appeal. The legal challenge arrived on August 30th, 1986. Xavier Roberts and Original Appalachian Artworks filed suit against Topps for copyright infringement. And on that date, a federal district judge in the Northern District of Georgia ordered Topps to halt production while considering the case. Formally styled as Original Appalachian Artworks, Inc. versus Topps Chewing Gum, Inc., 642 F. Support, 1031. The court's language was specific. Garbage Pail Kids are likely to harm the potential market for or the value of the Cabbage Patch Kid products. Topps worked through the litigation. Production continued. 16 series completed before the original run ended. A Reddit collector describing their inheritance. My dad worked for Topps for 25 years and had every card put in sleeves. Most cards are in NRMT plus condition. Another from r/Garbage Pail Kids. I was collecting GPK cards back in the summer of 1985. Third series was out, and I remember when everyone was collecting them and bringing them to, and the sentence stops there, the way those sentences always stop, because the ending is already known to anyone who lived through the summer of 1985 with a collection and a school to return to in September. Drop your series number and your rarest card in the comments. If you had Atom Bomb in near mint from a Series 1 pack, say so. If you remember which series you were chasing when the bans started hitting your school, or what condition your cards were in when you finally had to find somewhere to hide them, that story belongs here. The community that started trading in 1985 never fully stopped. What did you have? 1 minute past midnight on Saturday, August 1st, 1981. A cable channel went live. The footage that opened it was the Apollo 11 Saturn V launch, a rocket ascending into the Florida sky 12 years earlier, repurposed as the visual opening of a cable channel in a Fort Lee, New Jersey studio. Whether that was deliberate symbolism or accidental poetry, the historical record doesn't cleanly answer. And either way, it doesn't matter. The effect was the same. Then the music started. Video Killed the Radio Star by the Buggles. A song about technology displacing something older, playing on a channel that was technology displacing something older. The channel launched into a sliver of cable availability. Initially, only households in parts of New Jersey could receive MTV. New York City, the city the people behind this channel were trying to reach, hadn't picked up the signal yet. The team behind the launch watched it go live from a bar in Fort Lee, across the Hudson from the city they were broadcasting toward. The first 24 hours were technically chaotic in ways that the historical archive preserves. Clips playing at wrong times, moments of dead air, Pat Benatar's "I'm Gonna Follow You" beginning nearly 15 seconds into the actual video, Rod Stewart's "Da Ya Think I'm Sexy" running blank, audio only, no picture, before engineers cut it after approximately 10 seconds. The second video ever aired on MTV, immediately following The Buggles, was You Better Run by Pat Benatar. 5 VJs launched simultaneously on August 1st, 1981. Mark Goodman, Martha Quinn, Alan Hunter, J.J. Jackson, and Nina Blackwood. The first face viewers saw belonged to Alan Hunter, and that happened entirely by accident. A tape mishap during the opening sequence meant the planned intro didn't sync correctly, and there was Hunter, unplanned, the backup rather than the lead, welcoming the world to music television because the thing that was supposed to happen didn't. Hunter described the scale of the audience response as arriving gradually, the recognition building over weeks and months. We didn't know really who was watching, but then you'd go to a record store appearance and there's 1,000 kids in a line. He also had a clear-eyed view of the operation's actual power structure. We thought we were the center of MTV as the VJs, but the real parties, the real money, traveling the world in jets, was happening in the executive offices. Mark Goodman had come from radio. Within days of launch, the teleprompter scripts were abandoned. The network wanted the format to feel like radio with pictures, which meant the VJs needed to sound like people talking rather than people reading. Martha Quinn was 22 years old when she took the job, had done commercials in college, and carried a depth of music knowledge that Rolling Stone readers eventually recognized by voting her MTV's Best Ever VJ. She left in 1986, returned from 1989 to 1992. Nina Blackwood found the position in a Billboard classified ad and was hired after 2 auditions. She left in 1986 and went directly to hosting Entertainment Tonight's Rock Report. J.J. Jackson had started in radio in Boston and Los Angeles in the 1960s, worked as a music reporter for KABC-TV in Los Angeles, and brought more broadcast experience to August 1st, 1981 than any of the other 4 combined. He covered Live Aid in 1985. He helped launch the 120-minute series. He died on March 17, 2004, of an apparent heart attack at the age of 62, while making plans to join Goodman at Sirius XM Radio. The 4 who remained, Goodman, Quinn, Hunter, and Blackwood, wrote a book together in 2013, VJ, The Unplugged Adventures of MTV's First Wave, and appeared together at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2019. The I Want My MTV campaign launched on March 1, 1982, created by ad man George Lois. The mechanism was specific and operational. MTV ran spots that began with a scripted voiceover instructing viewers exactly what to do. If you don't get MTV where you live, call your cable operator and say, and then cut to a celebrity delivering a direct demand to the camera. Mick Jagger, I want my MTV. Pat Benatar, Pete Townsend, David Bowie. The campaign's purpose was coordinated consumer pressure on cable operators who hadn't yet added the channel, not brand awareness in the abstract, but a specific instruction to make a specific phone call to a specific company and deliver a specific demand. Vanity Fair later described it as one of the most effective ad campaigns of all time. It saved us. It transformed us. Cable operators added the channel. The audience that had been calling them, following instructions, stayed. The effect on the music business was structural and documented. Acts like Madonna, Boy George, Cyndi Lauper, and Duran Duran built commercial careers through MTV's early years in ways that radio alone couldn't have supported. Their visual identities were as commercially central as their recordings. A record label's promotional budget by the mid-1980s had to include a music video. This was no longer optional. Research confirmed the relationship between video airplay and record sales. What a band wore, how they moved on screen, what they looked like at 35 inches. These became commercial considerations as consequential as what they sounded like. If you were born in 1972, you were 9 years old when MTV launched on August 1, 1981. You were 20 when the next phase began. The shift arrived gradually and then suddenly. In 1987, Remote Control premiered on MTV, a game show, the first significant non-music programming, a crack in the music-only format that had held for 6 years. Then the acceleration. On May 21, 1992, The Real World New York premiered. 7 Strangers in a Soho Loft, filmed from February 16th through May 18th. 13 episodes, no music videos, and no VJs. American songwriter documented the transition precisely. With the premiere of The Real World, MTV began moving away from strictly music videos and into the realm of reality TV. The channel you watched in 1983 and the channel you watched in 1992 shared a name and a cable slot, and not much else. The VJs who'd launched on August 1, 1981, had mostly moved on by the time The Real World premiered. Goodman left in August 1987. Quinn left in 1986. Hunter left around the same time. Jackson and Blackwood both departed in 1986. If you were a child in the 1980s who became a teenager in the 1990s, both phases of MTV are yours. The channel grew up alongside you, changed what it was while you were watching it, and both the version with the 5 VJs and the version with the strangers in the loft carry legitimate claim on the decade and a half of your adolescence. You went from Martha Quinn to The Real World, and the whole arc was yours. A few other artifacts that help locate the decade. He-Man and the Masters of the Universe launched in 1982, Mattel's first wave of 8 core characters manufactured in Taiwan, with Castle Grayskull, Battle Ram, and Wind Raider initially produced in the United States. The line debuted at the New York Toy Fair that year. By the mid-1980s, the Masters of the Universe line had reached the kind of saturation where peak felt indistinguishable from permanence, which is the best possible position for a toy line to occupy in a child's understanding of the world. The Transformers arrived in 1984. Hasbro had licensed Diaclone and Microman molds from Japanese manufacturers and adapted them for the American market. The Saturday morning cartoon began airing in the fall of 1984. Marvel's American comic tie-in launched in May 1984. The toy line ran for 7 years in the United States from that starting point. Pac-Man hit U.S. arcades in 1980. The name had been changed from the original Japanese Puck-Man by the American distributor, specifically because of what they expected someone to do to the first letter on an exposed coin-op cabinet. The reasoning was defensible and ultimately correct. Donkey Kong arrived on July 9, 1981, Nintendo's solution to a warehouse of unsold radarscope hardware, which turned out to be one of the more consequential supply chain decisions in American entertainment history. Hubert released in 1982, developed by Gottlieb, with character voices generated by a randomized Votrack synthesizer, producing sounds that approximated profanity closely enough that children understood the joke completely, while adults couldn't quite confirm what they'd heard. The Sony Walkman TPSL-2 went on sale in Japan on July 1, 1979, and arrived in the United States in June 1980. Sony held approximately 40% of global Walkman unit sales throughout the 1980s and released more than 250 models in the US market across the decade. The Smithsonian holds a TPSL-2 in its collection. The device changed what listening to music meant. It moved the experience from fixed locations into every other space where a person could carry a cassette and a pair of headphones, and it put that experience under individual control in a way that neither radio nor the home stereo had managed. These objects don't live in separate compartments of memory. They share the same Saturday mornings, the same lunch tables, the same summer afternoons. The T120 tape sitting labeled in Sharpie on the face and spine was recording the same cartoons that were advertising the same toy lines that were being discussed at the same lunch tables where the Garbage Pail Kids changed hands. The Walkman in a jacket pocket was playing the same bands that the VJs were introducing on MTV at midnight. The decade has a texture that emerges from the combination, from all of it being simultaneous rather than sequential. Any single artifact from the right years, named correctly and placed in its actual context, opens the whole room. There is one thing the unlabeled tape required that no other household object of the decade demanded in quite the same way: a decision made in private, with no one watching, no information available, and no preview possible. Every other artifact came with something written on the outside. The Pac-Man cabinet displayed the title and the rules. The Garbage Pail Kids pack had a price and a brand. The MTVJ introduced the song and artist before the video started. Even a mislabeled VHS cassette was an attempt at communication, however inaccurate. The unlabeled tape said nothing. It presented itself as pure potential and asked you to commit to finding out what it contained before you could know whether you wanted to. The decision was yours, made in your specific living room, in your specific year, with the machine loaded and waiting, and nobody else in the room who could tell you whether pressing play was the right call. What you found afterward was specific to you, the person who made the tape, the person who watched it, the person who recorded over it, and the person who finally found it years later. Any of those roles might have been different people, or some of them might have been the same person at different ages. The tape held all of that history without announcing it. The unlabeled cassette was a sealed record of everyone who had touched it, and you couldn't access the record without initiating it. The people who know this feeling, who understand without explanation why the absence of a label on a VHS cassette carried a specific psychological weight, are the people who were in those living rooms. The membership the title describes is that knowledge, not a trivia question, not a cultural reference that can be looked up and faked. The specific texture of the decision, the specific weight of the cassette, the specific sound of the mechanism engaging after you'd already committed to finding out, that came from being there. Tell me what was on yours. Tell me your GPK series number and your rarest card. Tell me which VJ you watched most, and whether you know the tape mishap story that put Alan Hunter on screen first by accident. Tell me what year you found the tape with no label and what you decided to do with it, and whether you thought about it since. The comments below are the thread. The stories are specific in the way this decade is specific. Not nostalgia in the abstract, but the exact year, the exact artifact, the exact room. Leave yours here. Subscribe for more stories like this. All of them stay in their lane.